welcome to another video. Today it's part 4 of the Vogue 8577 sew along and we're going to be sewing together the bodice. Let's get started. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is actually head back to the beginning of the instructions and start work on the bodice. So the first thing that it wants you to do is stitch, dart in bodice front, press towards centre. And we're going to do that for the lining and for the main fabric. Now so far I've made all my markings and notches on the lining fabric, and I then use those as pattern pieces to cut out my main fabric. So I still have to transfer over the darts, the notches onto every single piece here to the main fabric. Don't forget to do that if you've been using this method. Okay, so I have transferred my markings over to my main fabric, so I'm now going to pin all of my darts, and I've got 8 of them to do. So I'm going to get that done and then I'm going to sew them all. Okay, all my darts are pinned. I am now going to sew them all. You backstitch at the start and then you sew off at the point, tie it and leave a nice long tail so that you can tie it in a couple of knots. That way you don't end up with really pointy dart points, but I will show you when I get to that stage. Okay, so all my darts are sewn. Now I just need to tie them off. So left myself nice long tails. Again, doing this, trying to make sure I'm in focus. You literally want to tie 2 or 3 knots and then snip off the excess. You want to leave yourself a bit of a tail, but not too much. I'm going to do that with all the rest of the 7 darts. Okay, so we've actually done steps 1 and step 3 because I've sewn all the darts in one go. I'm a firm believer in kind of getting as many of the same processes done at the same time as possible. Now it does want you to press your front darts towards the centre and press your back darts towards the centre as well. However, I'm going to sew as many seams as I can before I get up and go and press anything. So I'm going to move on to the next step, which is step number 2, and it's run gathering stitches along the upper edge of the front bodice between the small circles as shown. Now I have marked my small circles onto my bodice piece. So here and here, and I've done the same on the lining, and so I'm going to run 2 lines of gathering stitches between those points. And the gathering stitches are, for me, they're going to be 4 long, and again, you don't backstitch at the start. I'm going to do 1 at 1/2 inch, 1 at 3/8 of an inch, and that way I have my gathering stitches inserted. 2 lines of gathering stitches between the gathering points. Now I'm going to do that to the other 3 front panels. Okay, so we've already done step 3, so we're going to move on to step 4, which is stitch bodice back sections together at centre back. So you're going to match up the 3 notches along the centre back and stitch at your seam allowance, which is 5/8 of an inch. For me, I'm stitching at 1/2 an inch because I'm going to use the back seam, the side seams, as a way of just adjusting the fit a little bit for me so that it fits. But if you have made a muslin, which you should have, to check fit, use the seam allowance that is appropriate for you. Okay, so I have my back piece pinned together. I have matched the notches. There is 3 notches on the back centre seam. I am also going to reduce my stitch length from my gathering stitch length back to my sewing stitch length. Please don't forget to do that, because it's really, really irritating if you sew a seam and then realise that you're going to have to re-sew it because you used the wrong stitch length. Ask me how I know. I'm going to say that a lot this tutorial. And the back seams are sewn together. Now you're going to want to press these open, but we've got one more set of stitching we can do before we have to go to the iron. So the next one is step 5, stitch yoke back sections together at centre back. So again, we're going to stitch the yoke lining and the yoke main fabric together at the centre back, which also has 3 notches on it. Again, if you've used this method of cutting out, make sure that you transfer all the markings over. These are where the gathered portion of the front bodice needs to gather into, so you need to mark that on both your lining and your main fabric, and you also need to make sure that you have cut your notches into both pieces. Back yoke panels are pinned together, sew them at the 5/8 of an inch seam allowance if that's what you're using. For me it's going to be the 1/2 inch seam allowance because all of my vertical seams are going to be done with 1/2 an inch and all of my horizontal seams are going to be done with 5/8 of an inch. Okay, before I actually press, I'm going to finish all of the seam allowances. I'm going to pink them all. That is actually just for the back yoke panel and the back panel at the moment. Okay, now it's time to press. So I've got my back yoke panels, my back bodice panels and my front bodice panels to press here. So we're going to be opening up the back seams and we're going to be pressing the darts towards the center. Also, you want to remember, if you're using a friction pen like I am to mark your gather points, etc, etc, the friction pen will disappear with heat. So when you're pressing these parts, this is the back yoke panels, you need to be really careful to not get any heat or steam near your marking points. Okay, so the next step is number 6 and it's stitch lower edge of yoke back to upper edge of bodice back, trim press seam towards yoke back. So it's sewing the yoke panel to the back bodice panel, matching up the notches and the middle centre seam. Okay, so I've matched my centre back, I've matched my notches, and the ends will not match. You will have a little bit of overhang of the back bodice piece. The yoke is a little bit smaller, but the stitching points meet at 5/8 of an inch, and so when you turn it all up it will all fit it together perfectly. So you sew that at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So our bodice backs are together. You are going to want to press this, but again I have way more things that I can do before I need to get up and go to the ironing board again. My basic rule of thumb is that I will keep sewing until I have to sew seams together. So I kept going until I then had to join the yoke to the back bodice, which meant that these were unpressed, so I needed them to be pressed so I could sew that together accurately. So that is my general rule of thumb. Keep going until you actually have to sew seams together, unpress seams together, and then get up and press. Okay, so as we're skipping the pressing section for now, we're going to move on to step 7. Pin bodice front sections to yoke back at shoulders, matching symbols, adjust the gathers, baste, stitch, trim, press seams towards yoke back. So basically we're going to do exactly that. We are going to attach the front bodice to the back bodice, and we're going to bring in the gathers so that they match within the notches, the marks that are on the back yoke, and adjust these so they look pretty, sew it and see. Okay, so this is the bodice front, this is the bodice back. There are notches, so I've matched my notches up and then put a pin in. There is going to be a slight overlap, don't worry about that. I then have put a pin in the beginning of the gathering section and I've matched that up with the mark on the back. This is all the bit that's going to be gathered. Then this is the end of the gathering section, and again there's a mark on the back yoke, so I've pinned those. So what I'm now going to do is pull on my gathering threads to gather this down, and again I'm trying to do this looking in the viewfinder, not at real life, which is slightly more difficult. Yeah. There we go. Got those two. And those two. Make sure that the rest of the gathering threads is not going into the sort of the what's going to be the main side of the dress, just so that it makes it a little bit easier for tidying up afterwards. And you just want to pull and then kind of distribute, hold on to that end and distribute those gathers across that space. So you want to be able to make it lie like that against the back yoke piece, and you want to evenly distribute these. You can wrap it around a pin to help anchor that bit so that I can push these right the way over, and then I'm going to pin. And again, this is just going to take a little bit of time, a little bit of finessing to get it to lie flat and how you would like it to look. You want to make sure that none of these get rolled under and caught into the seam line. Now it's kind of a bit too loose over here, so I'm going to redistribute this way. And there we go, I'm happy with that. So it's lying flat at the back, lots of gathering in there. When you sew, you want to make sure that both the front and the back gathering stitches are out of the way, so over, up like this, so you can easily trim them off later and you don't have to chop them out of the seam. And I'm going to do that for the other side, and I'm going to do the same for the lining. Okay, so when you get to the gathers here, you want to sew quite carefully, and you don't want to let your presser foot push the fabric over this way. You want to kind of try and keep it as straight as you can, and I'm not sure if this is the best angle, but it's the easiest angle for me to sew at and try and talk about what I'm doing. So you want to kind of pull the fabric as taut, not taut, but pull it down. Do not sew over your pins. And don't let the presser foot push too much fabric this way, so raise it up, redistribute. See, for example, here we've got a really big bit, which is not what we want, so I'm going to get to it, and then I'm going to kind of get in there, and then I've sort of pulled it down, and it's, rather than one big bit, it's gone into lots of sort of smaller gathers. I hope you can see this, and I hope this is making sense. This is why they want you to baste, so that you can have a look and see if you're happy with the way that your gathers are looking. I'm not basting, I'm just sewing. That's my line of gathers. So pretty happy with that. I'm going to chop all these threads off, and I'm going to do the other side. Okay, so again, we don't need to press quite yet, and we don't need to trim our seams quite yet. Going to do that all in one go. The next step is number 8, stitch bodice front sections to bodice back sections at sides. We are not going to do this, we are going to do something else. So we're going to skip that step, and we're going to move on to step number 9, stitch middle back at sections together at centre back. We're going to do that next. Okay, so you want to be sewing up the seam which has got the 3 notches in it. The sides, the bit with 2 notches are the side seams, and they're going to be attached to the front middle parts. So you're going to sew this at 5/8 of an inch on the main fabric and your lining fabric. Okay, so I've just stitched my middle backs together. I actually got mine wrong because I'm doing mine with 1/2 an inch seam allowance, is not 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and this is a vertical seam, so I've unpicked that and redone it at the right seam allowance. You also want to make sure that you've marked in the points where your gathered portion of your skirt is going to meet. Make sure that you have got those on there. And again, if you're using a friction pen, remember that when you do press this, eventually the friction pen will disappear if you get the heat too close to it. Right, So the next step is step number 10, stitch middle front sections to middle back at sides. We're not going to do that. We are going to stitch our middle front sections to our bodice front sections instead. Okay, so I've got my middle front section pinned here. This is the front where the buttons are going to go, and this is the side seam. The side seam is the one with the double notch in it, and there is a double notch up here, so you want to make sure that you're getting the double notches in the side seams. Then there's also a notch here that matches up, and you just want to pin across and sew that at 5/8 of an inch. Okay, after sewing the front panels, the front middle panels onto the front bodice, we can finally start pressing. But before you press, you want to finish your edges. I am going to pink mine. Okay, this is the middle back portion. You want to press that back seam open. You also want to make sure that you do not get rid of the marks that you've made if you're using a friction pen. This is the front middle, this is the bodice front. You want to press that seam right the way down towards the bodice, to the front middle. Okay, so this is the front bodice, this is the back yoke. You want to press this seam towards the back yoke. This is the back bodice, this is the back yoke. You want to press this seam up towards the back yoke. And the final bit of sewing for the bodice that we're going to do for now is this is the back middle portion. I didn't even attempt to pattern match that. It looks like I tried really badly and failed. Promise I didn't. It makes me giggle. And so we're going to sew this to the bodice back, and that was why we were pressing there then, because we were going to be crossing over two seams, so we needed those both to be open. So yeah, attach this to the bodice back. Okay, that seam is done. So I am now going to pink the edge and press it towards the middle back portion. Okay, so the next section was pin the upper edge of the middle section to lower edge of bodice, matching centers and seams, stitch, trim, press seams towards middle section. So we've done that. The thing that we've missed out is sewing up the side seams. So you will have your bodice completed as over here, just no side seams sewn. I really hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments down below. If you found it useful, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't yet, please subscribe, and I will see you again very soon. Bye!